Welcome everyone to this webinar. Joining us today are food safety experts Tia Glave and Jill Stuber. You might recognize them from their show Real Talk Food Safety or their consulting company Catalyst LLC. Today we're going to talk about the cost of food quality and food safety. Tia, Jill, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing at Catalyst?
Yes. So at Catalyst, our main goal is to empower technical experts to become technical leaders. And we do that by really focusing on leadership development for technical people in food. And all of our programs are coaching based. So when you come to our program, one of the things that's different from a leadership development standpoint is that it's practical, it's relatable to what we do in food. And then it's intrinsic, because we use coaching-based principles. That's like the bread and butter, I would say, that makes up Catalyst.
Okay, great. And so for those folks who aren't familiar, I would definitely encourage you to check out the content that Tia and Jill have out there. That's on LinkedIn and a bunch of other places. So definitely worth your time. So I know that the cost of quality is a topic that you two are focused on. So can you quickly define that term for us? So what does cost of quality actually mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Cost of quality. Originally it was designed system level and to incorporate organizational quality in all aspects. So that would be cost of retention, poor engagement, rework, discarded product, everything. It's really tangible and intangible costs. In fact, quality planning, as defined by the great quality gurus like Duran, it was organizational quality planning was part of cost of quality and why we did it. But one misconception in food is that cost of quality or poor cost of quality is only associated with production and product.
Yeah, and it's important to define the cost of quality because organizations, because they don't properly define it, they really don't see their quality organization as business partners who can help drive out costs from the organization. It's almost like they limit quality into, oh, you're supposed to work on these quality production things, or you're supposed to only do these things. But if you really recognize what the cost of quality actually means, then you can use your quality organization to do the things that Jill's talking about, drive out costs.
So our audience is made up of folks, some of whom are involved in quality, some of whom are involved in safety, and some who do a bit of both, right? So how do food quality and food safety relate to each other, and how do they both affect the cost of production?
Yeah. So the way we like to describe food safety versus food quality is that food safety is non-negotiable. So it's the procedures, it's the programs, it's the culture you have in place to really ensure that the food that's at the table of consumers are safe from consumption, that they're not going to get sick or die from it. When you talk about food quality, we say that it is negotiable, that it's the attributes that even though they might be unpleasant to taste or to see, it won't hurt the consumer that's eating it or make anyone sick.
Yeah. And I think when we think about the cost of production when it comes to quality and food safety, there are a lot of factors involved. And contrary to belief, it actually starts way back in the design phase, not at production. So it's really about how do you design products that meet the voice of customer for both safety and quality. And if this process is designed to match the desired output, you'll have success. But if you compromise on product design because of cost, your target market likely changes, and that impacts your production costs. But if your process can't make the product that you've designed to the specifications, then you have failures every day, and that's cost every day. And obviously that does impact production costs. So really the bottom line is if you design products that people want and you produce them to meet those requirements, that's where you are most efficient and also most profitable.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I mean, the fact that all this really traces back all the way to the design process, right? So,
Yeah.
if you're wondering, hey, why aren't we getting the results we are looking for? Why is it, not producing the level of quality we're shooting for, or it's, overshooting our costs? Usually there's some sort of root in that initial step of how did you design this process? What was the plan in place? And
Yeah.
I think so we work with a lot of Frontline. We work with a lot of companies in food and beverage, but also in a lot of other industries where kind of change management is a lot more it's a lot more of a mandatory thing, right? So there's a whole MOC, management of change, or MOC process that's mandatory in some industries, but not most food and beverage related industries. And so I think some folks are kind of waking up to the reality that, well, in order to get the kind of quality and to get your costs under control alongside that quality, you have to have kind of a robust process for managing those kind of changes, and to have the right designs in place, or to change your designs if they're not currently in place.
Yeah, and really the food industry can learn from those industries, right? And you'll start to see that some companies are talking about management of change, and they are looking at their change management. And we all have some sense of change management because things are changing all the time. But when you really look at how how you are supposed to have an efficient management of change, like system and process, then that is something that I really feel like the food industry, the food and beverage industry could learn from. And we see it happening a little bit, but there's some work to do on our end when it comes to management of change. So that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of kind of cross pollination across industries, even in sometimes unlikely places.
Yeah.
So we all know that management often responds to the language of dollars and cents, right? So that tends to get people's attention, as you two have pointed out already. So how would you suggest that companies actually measure the financial impact of poor food quality?
Yeah, so when you think about the financial impact and measuring it, you can think about external indicators as well as external indicators. And so some of the things that come to mind around external indicators is that you can track and trend consumer complaints. And some organizations also have groups that look at consumer insights. So really taking a look at what do our consumers want, right? So that you can design exactly what they want and be able to make, and at least attempt to make exactly what they want, which is what Jill was talking about. There's also some internal indicators where we talk about that upfront design work, right? What are some measures you can put into place that you want to hit each time you're going through the commercialization process and the product development process, as well as first pass failures, right? And rework. That also could be indicators of quality, as well as production audits and production downtime. Sometimes quality gets off if your production goes down, if your equipment goes down, and that startup product might not be as great, for the first 2 minutes or whatever your process is like. Having equipment be continuous, if that's your process, or being able to completely batch without stopping that process, will help with quality and something that you can actually manage and save money along the way, right? If you can keep going with production, that saves money.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So then I guess, I think one of the challenges that folks in these types of roles have is really trying to quantify and bring a, kind of concrete case to management, or to whoever is making the decisions about this sort of thing. So how can organizations better use data and analytics to identify and reduce food quality costs?
That's a great question. And often we say data will set us free. And I believe that. There's been a shift to start using SPC, statistical process control. And in food, it's often misunderstood and a misused tool, because what actually happens is food companies tend to manage by specification. And what that means is, right, until something eclipses a high level, we perhaps don't react, or unless it bottoms out, we don't react. And what that causes is that we don't react when we should, or we're reacting when we don't need to. That drives up product and production costs. True SPC, that was designed by Walter Schuhart for manufacturing, really covered efficiencies and cost. It was about how do we make products that meet specifications but are also most profitable. Once again, profit is always involved.
Mhm.
So really, if we transition to use this true SPC models that's used in other manufacturing industries, it would benefit the food industry greatly to have that efficiency and the profits that they want to see.
Jill, you're absolutely right. When I implemented a SBC process for weight control, we saved over $700,000 each year in product savings. And that's just managing our weights, right? And so this goes back to ensuring that your quality organization is really driving out those costs, really having time to think about cost of quality, and how you can put things in place like systems and being able to analyze data and collect the data, right, to solve those costs.
Yeah, being an integrated business partner.
Yeah, we say that a lot at Catalyst. How do you make sure that your food safety and your quality team is integrated into the way you do work every day?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I mean, I find that a lot of the clients that we work with, I mean, I consider part of our job as a supplier or partner or vendor to them is to kind of give them access to that information that they need to make decisions, make a business case where there maybe wasn't one before. So yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to throw around a lot of folk wisdom, but if you bring kind of hard facts and you have a record, kind of the data that you've been collecting over time, that's pretty hard to ignore if you if you really have that armed and ready.
Yeah.
So, making sure your own organization is up to standards is hard enough, but keeping tabs on suppliers is a whole other topic. So, how can companies make sure their suppliers are meeting quality standards without, driving up costs at the same time?
Yeah. One of the things that we focus on with suppliers is that you really have a relationship with them. The goal is for an organization is for you to have clear specs before signing an agreement. Making sure that you're having those conversations, that you've done those trial runs, that you've been working with your supplier, that you understand who's responsible for what, right? That's like the first step to making sure that you go into a relationship with a supplier that they understand your quality standards, and you understand their costs, right? If you decide in the beginning, oh, this is what we care about around quality and our specs match, and we go into an agreement. And then you realize that through some of the things that we talked about before, trending consumer complaints, you realize, oh, we really need to do something different in taste, for instance, right? Maybe it's too sweet. We need to lower the sweetness. And so now that's a different quality standard. That may increase your cost depending on what your supplier has to do, right, to now meet your new spec. But your relationship with that supplier is what matters, because as you have those changes, you're having those conversations, you're coming to new agreements that hopefully works for everyone.
Yeah. To add to that, it really is the upfront work. It's building relationships and understanding suppliers. I think what happens is we see people trying to inspect quality and food safety in at receiving and using sampling that really isn't statistically valid. And so it really tells you nothing. And so I think if you're going to sample, my message is always use appropriate statistical methods.
Yes.
And yes, there is a balance with sometimes the practical side, but know the risks so that you understand what you're able to detect and respond to. So for example, if you're going to do acceptance sampling and use mill standards, do the big sample size. That's what it's for. But if you want to do SPC or pre-control because it has typically less samples, that's great, but you have to go the distance and be prepared to react and shift as you need to. So, another thing is with suppliers, sometimes you can ask for process data from them, certificates of process, instead of COAs. So that way, once again, you get data about their process and systems versus trying to inspect product to see if it's acceptable.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I love that last point, Jill, about kind of going. I think one theme that I'm picking up on some of your responses to these questions are, you kind of have to go to the root cause, right? It's not, hey,
Mhm, mhm.
let's check out the output at the very end of the process, and let's make sure that well, you do some of that, of course, but
Mhm.
I think that doesn't often diagnose the root of the issue, and in this case, it might be something to do with their standards or their procedures or their policies that's actually leading to the quality issues on the end. Just like we talked about a second ago,
Yeah,
design decisions at the front of the process. That impacts the products you're ultimately able to produce and at the costs that you're seeing. So
yeah,
it's not really enough to just look at the output, because that's it's the problem started way before the
right.
output was actually produced.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, what are some common weak points? You mentioned that there are these different points that you have to kind of verify for your suppliers, and different ways to kind of handle quality among your suppliers. So, what are some of the weak points in supply chain quality control, and what can companies do about those weak points?
Yeah. Ren, you just brought one up. Not really understanding the full process of how your product is being made, how it's going to be shipped to you, what are their process controls. A lot of people feel like, oh, I'm going to give this to a supplier and they're going to make it, and then they're going to give it to me and it's going to be within spec, and I don't have to think about how to make it. I don't have to think about those risks. But in reality, you do. It's your product, right? And you have to use that product. And whether or not you're processing it farther, that depends on how that product is coming to your facility. And so it's so important for you to understand their process. It's important for you to evaluate their risk and understand how they evaluate risk. And making sure that you do it often, right? Like we like to say that you are evaluating your suppliers and their risk at least annually, and whenever things change. And that means if things change in their process or things change in your process, because it may change the way product flows, right? Or how product shows up at your door. So those are very important things and very common weak points. And then I would say, like, not having the right support. Again, a lot of people think, oh, my supplier is going to do all this stuff, I really don't need to support that work, or I really don't need someone looking there or someone checking at receiving, because my suppliers, they got it. But in reality, you need to make sure that you have the right support to support your suppliers, to support these risk assessments, to support understanding their process. And if you don't, you run into some of the problems that we're talking about when it shows up at your door, or when you're trying to use it in your facility and realize, oh, wow, this is not up to our quality standards.
Yeah, I would add, right, that's where people think, oh, we'll figure it out once we
Oh,
get
yeah.
started with our supplier. And
Yes.
that doesn't work. That's too late.
Yeah.
But that's also where it's really helpful to have people who are not only technical experts, but really have the leadership skill sets to better influence and communicate and build
Mhm.
relationships that can help drive your systems to these places where you're being more proactive to prevent things from happening instead of waiting until they get back to your own facility or become problems for your supplier. Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in an ideal world, you would have good ideas, and they would be supported by evidence, and those things would
Mhm.
just percolate to the top, right?
Yeah,
But that doesn't happen most of
it
the time.
doesn't.
I mean, what really frustrating thing I see a lot, with the folks that we work with, is that there are folks in health and safety and quality, and they know what the right thing is, but
Yeah.
it's just very hard to get buy-in from everybody else in the organization, because maybe it's costly, maybe it slows things down, but it is still ultimately the right thing to do for various reasons.
Mhm.
And so just having this kind of goes back to being armed with the right information, being able to present a really indisputable case for what you're advocating. And I think that's a really powerful approach that it's hard to ignore. Again, oftentimes what drives change is some sort of catalyzing incident, right? Something
Mhm.
happens, there's a recall or some sort of safety incident or whatever, and even though all along the data was there. It was
Yeah.
clear that this was a risk, that this could have happened any time, but it's when it does happen that becomes really salient. So, just to wrap this up here, so let's look ahead a little bit to the near future. So, what kind of trends in technology usage are you two seeing, and how might that impact the cost of maintaining food quality going forward?
Oh gosh, there's some different things that are coming up. We hear a lot about things that we believe will help perhaps lower costs in the long term and also improve quality, like vision systems, right? Things that look at products to make sure they're all consistent. Automation and robotics are something that people are getting excited about. Like, how can they help improve how we make food? There's also some other areas like sustainability that we're still understanding, like how will sustainability initiatives impact food safety and food quality. Same is true for upcycled product. One thing we learned through COVID is in times where there's perhaps low supply, food fraud increases. So even as we think about emerging trends and technologies, like how will food fraud and food security play into the cost of quality and the cost of food safety as we go forward?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think things like computer vision, as you mentioned, I think that's going to be a major player at some point. I think folks are obviously reasonably hesitant to adopt things that where they're not sure about the failure rate, or just how much effort will this actually save. But at some point, I think the hit rate will be high enough where it'll be kind of hard to ignore the benefits of it. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Well, so we're going to move on to Q&A here, but before we do, can you two tell the folks listening kind of the best place to find you on the internet, or to get in touch with you if they're looking for some help?
Yeah, absolutely. If you go to our website, it's the www.foodsafetykatalyst.com. And there's a spot where, of course, you can join our newsletter so that you can get all the information that we share every week to keep people in the loop on what's happening for leadership development and in the food safety and quality space.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
And we're on LinkedIn.
All right.
You mentioned we're on LinkedIn. Connect with us.
Fantastic. All right, let's kick it over to Q&A then. All right, first question we have is, do you have any recommendations for preventing foodborne pathogens?
Hi, good morning. Yes. So when you think about preventive measures for foodborne pathogens, I always say focus on building strong food safety programs and putting resources into continuous improvement. A lot of people try to just be compliant with regulatory, compliant with the bare minimum that their customers might want, but compliance isn't enough. You have to go above and beyond, and you must be investing in your leaders, in your process, and in your technology to really have preventative measures in place for foodborne viruses and illnesses and outbreaks.
Makes sense. And this one's related. Do you see any impact on pathogen risks from climate change? So I guess, does that change anything for you guys in terms of how you approach this risk?
That's a really great question. And I think those are things that we're learning as we are experiencing climate change. But we've definitely noticed that as conditions shift, right, we know theoretically microorganisms are other pathogens and can shift as well. But this really goes back to what Tia was talking about with really being on the proactive side of understanding what's happening. So really leaning into prevention with risk assessments and doing your homework to research what is happening, what changes are coming to impact your facility, your organization, your products. And a lot of times that's also partnering with external resources, because these are areas that are new to all of us, but there's certainly people with more in-depth focus on these areas, and really networking and connecting with them to help support food safety, because there's so many aspects of food safety that it really takes a village.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, nobody can be an expert in all things, right? So, so I think, I think that's a great point that we need to engage the people who truly are experts on these different subtopics. Like the two of you are on certain areas related to food safety and quality.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. Next up, are there any best practices for allergen management and preventing cross contact with allergens?
Yes, there are. If you are really thinking about managing allergens and different allergens in your facilities and throughout your supply chain, two of the things that I really talk about is segregation and sanitation. So focusing on how are you segregating allergens in every part of your supply chain, from receiving to storing to processing to shipping, right, all the way to your consumer. And that could be through dedication of equipment or separation of buildings or areas, that type of thing. And then the second thing that comes to mind is sanitation. How are you cleaning between different runs or production runs or processes that you might not have dedicated equipment? Or how do you clean if there is an allergen spill in your warehouse to ensure that there's not any cross contact issues happening there?
Yeah, makes total sense. All right. So we had a question. So I guess somebody noticed that you two have a newsletter that you put out. So they want to know basically how often does the newsletter go out?
Yes, we send a newsletter out weekly with information on what's happening in the industry or what we're working on, what we're hearing, and what we're talking about. So really staying current with what's going on in our food safety community.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great way to stay informed with very little effort, just kind of passively getting it in your inbox once a week. That's great. All right. So last question we have here is, what are some things to look for in a successful food safety audit?
Gosh, that's a great question. When you talk about a successful food safety audit, I would say success happens way before your audit. Yes. So it's about doing it every day and living your food safety programs. Part of that is what Tia alluded to earlier, with really investing in developing strong food safety leaders who are dedicated to continuous improvement and engaging your team in food safety, because food safety culture, to have a successful food safety audit, is really all about how are you engaging people and how are you doing things different to have the food safety culture you want.
Yes, I agree. It's all about really understanding your programs, knowing your strengths and your opportunities, and being able to communicate those things. And the only way you truly know, as someone that is most likely not doing every part of every program, is to live it every day. Exactly what Jill is saying. The most successful audits that I've had, and the ones that I'm excited about, are the ones that we're not in overnight trying to clean everything, trying to organize everything. It's just really the way that we do work. And I know where everything is. I know what we're doing because we do it every day.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, nothing can happen overnight, especially in the domain we're talking about. So to kind of jump on it at the last second to try to fix everything, I mean, that's frankly impossible, as you two have pointed out. So yeah, just living it and doing it day to day. That's really the best advice, it seems like. Yeah. All right. Well, Tia, Jill, thank you so much for your time here. That brings an end to the webinar with a minute or two to spare. So thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.